So in First Samuel, we are told, now the sons of Eli were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord or for the duties of the priests to the people. And they're priests. They're members of the Levitical or Jewish priesthood. Eli's two sons are priests, but they're scoundrels. When anyone offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the one who was sacrificing, "Give me meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, "Let them burn the fat first, and then take whatever you wish," he would say, "No, you must give it now. If not, I will take it by force." Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for they treated the offerings of the Lord with contempt. Just to give you some idea of how things are supposed to go, from Leviticus, this is the law that the priests are supposed to follow. And the priests shall burn them, the Holocaust offerings, the offerings from the people. The priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire for a sweet savor. All the fat is the Lord's. In particular, the fat needs to be burned away, or it's not a proper sacrifice. But Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, they don't care. Now, Benson in his commentary says, nothing brings religion so much into contempt with the people as the open profaneness of those that are ministers of it, in other words, priests. The validity, however, and efficacy of God's ordinances do not depend altogether on the piety of those that minister in them. We believe that as Catholics, even though Benson is a Protestant. In other words, we know that the sacraments can be valid even if the priest celebrating them is a sinner and is a scoundrel like Hophni and Phinehas. The little table is shaking. Oh, I know why it's shaking. It's shaking because my fan is on. Here, I'm holding it. Anyway, why is this important? I think it's important for us to read this passage in 1 Samuel because many of our own priests and bishops are scoundrels. Some of them have done very bad things, and it leads to what's described in 1 Samuel. The people give up hope and trust in the priesthood. That's very natural and understandable. Now, why is the priesthood important? This is something that we're going to get into in the book of Hebrews. But I'm going to refer to the Annunciation, which we're reading about today in Luke. Jesus is a bridge or a mediator between God and man. He is fully God and fully man, and he connects us to God. He is, as the writer of Hebrews will say, the great high priest of our faith. Pretend like you didn't see my wife in the background there. She just sat down in her chair. Nobody's noticing anything that's going wrong today. Jesus functions as a high priest, but think about Mary and Gabriel at the Annunciation. God doesn't come directly to Mary. He doesn't speak to her directly, and he doesn't suddenly appear in her womb as Jesus directly. He appears to her as Gabriel. Gabriel earlier has appeared to Zacharias. He sends his emissary, his angel, his messenger, a mediator between God and man, or in this case, God and woman. And then Mary also functions that way for us. Mary is the greatest Christian and the great bridge between us and Jesus, who is the bridge to God. So in a way, God likes to act this way. He uses the elements of creation, both sacramentally in the form of the sacraments themselves, using water for baptism and bread and wine for the host and so forth. He uses the things of creation to help people get to him, but he also uses rational creatures like humans and angels to do the same thing. We all have a priestly function. We all can serve as the bridge between God and man. And if as Christians we behave the way Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons, do, if we neglect our priestly duties as Christians, for we all have the priesthood of the laity, it's all part of what we are as Christians. If we neglect that, or if we behave as scoundrels, we do just the opposite. We push people further away. And so we have an obligation to do what Gabriel does, what Mary does in her fiat, what Hophni and Phinehas don't do, but what Samuel tries to do. And we hear more about Samuel and the kind of role he's being called to as we read more tomorrow. But this is the role of the priesthood, so that when we get into it in Hebrews, you might understand it a little bit better.